broadcasting from the Unshackled studios in Melbourne. This is WilmsFront, brought to you by the Unshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wilms.
Hello and welcome to tonight's show. The date is Wednesday, the 27th of November, 2019. It is just after 7 p.m. here in Melbourne. We are live on the Tim Wilms YouTube channel. So if you are tuning in live, please make yourself known in the live chat. And I've just set up and put a link in the chat to the entropy enhanced software, as I like to call it, because this channel is under 1,000 subscribers. Entropy allows a bit more interaction between the live chat viewers and myself, the host. You can ask me a question, I can set through a viewer poll, and best of all, you can send through a super chat to support this show and also to support the work of the Unshackled. So Federal Parliament is back this week for the final sitting fortnight of the year. It began with politicians going to Canberra, or sitting on the Monday. On the previous evening, 60 Minutes, which is on the Nine Network, which also owns the Fairfax papers. They did a joint interview and investigation with alleged Chinese spy defector Wang Lingjing. He discussed his role in foreign interference in Hong Kong, which is going through the pro-democracy protests, which are still going, and the pro-democracy candidates won big in the local elections that just passed this week. He also discussed China's plans to interfere in the Taiwanese upcoming elections, and also described how he arranged for Chinese students in Australia to infiltrate pro-Hong Kong student groups. The investigation also contained allegations that the Chinese, they were planning to install a Manchurian candidate, or as I call it, a Mandarin candidate, in Australia's federal parliament. Their target was a luxury car dealer, Bo Nick Zaho. He was a Liberal Party member in the federal division of Chisholm since 2015. He was allegedly approached by another Chinese businessman, Brian Shen, and offered $1 million to run for Liberal pre-selection in the seat of Chisholm, which pre-selection was eventually won, and winning the seat at the federal election was Gladys Liu, who is the first Chinese-born Australian in the federal parliament, and of course she has been under a cloud over the past few months over her associations with Chinese community groups, which are ultimately linked to China's National Front, which is their propaganda, foreign interference, whatever you want to call it. And of course, what makes this revelation so explosive is the fact that Nick Zaho was found dead in a motel room in Mount Waverley back in March, where the cause of death as of this stage is unknown, which is quite strange. So it's been a political football since the federal election of how Australia should approach its future relationship with China, with its geopolitical ambitions, its totalitarian government, which of course has been trying to strengthen its grip over democratic Hong Kong, which is under the one country, two systems, after it was handed back to China from the British in 1997. So even though the rest of the China is a totalitarian state, Hong Kong still has, as I just mentioned before, elections, but certainly there's a lot of interference from Beijing in Hong Kong affairs. And of course, there are human rights abuses as well. The New York Times published internal Communist Party documents exposing how they're culturally genociding and brainwashing the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang province, and really strong, we wouldn't say strong, but really forceful language by Xi Jinping about how he wanted to basically break these people. This in Australia, I would say the bipartisan consensus that has emerged between Liberal, Labor, and Green that we need to rethink how to continue to both trade with China, yet stand up and protect our national interest from foreign interference and promote liberal democratic values. This consensus, as I mentioned, there was a lot of political point scoring throughout the year on the China question, but since Liberal MPs Andrew Hastie and James Paterson were denied visas to go on a study tour to China unless they repented for their past criticism, that really, I think. Both China sympathizers in the Liberal, Labor, and Green Party basically said this is unacceptable by China to treat elected politicians by that. And obviously they've come to Parliament this week rocked by this 60 Minutes Fair Fact investigation. And it seems that our politicians, they're finally aware of the problem, yet they have absolutely no idea how to achieve that. Whenever Australia's relationship with China is in the news, or there is another sensational revelation about the extent of its foreign interference in Australia, the China expert the Unshackled can always rely upon is Dave Lee, who runs his own geopolitical YouTube channel with the geopolitical threat that China poses. That's his primary focus. Now, I caught up with Dave last night to record what is the feature interview of tonight's show. So it is not live. What you're seeing of me now is live, but you will see when I play the segment that my shirt changes, which obviously is impossible in about a 5-second segment. But I will still be interacting with our live viewers in the chat, and I will answer entropy questions and read out super chats when we are back live for the conclusion of the show. So without further ado, here is my chat with Dave Lee.
This is WilmsFront, brought to you by the Unshackled.net.
Dave, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Tim.
I like having a China expert who I can regularly bring on the show. I feel like I'm stepping up to sort of Sky News level now. Whenever there's a geopolitical issue, I can ring you up and say, oh, can you come on my show for comment?
Yeah, of course, anytime. Yeah, so you wanted to talk about this spy.
Oh, well, that's the latest. Every week there seems to be a new revelation about China's attempted foreign interference and influence in Australia. Should I say attempted or successful? There's a fine line at times.
It's been very successful, and I don't think many people have grasped how many spies have been in Australia since the Korean War. They've had, and the Vietnam War. These two wars were against China. Ever since then, China's been sending spies down here and trying to turn people. It was kind of funny seeing this 60 Minutes, dramatization of a spy, a spy that was subverting Hong Kong and Taiwan. And I bet a lot of Australians now are looking for this type of spy in Australia, which is the most ridiculous thing ever, because they're not going to pick that type of spy. They're going to pick someone that looks like you or me, or they're going to pick an Indian, or they're going to pick a South Korean. And somewhat this 60 Minutes little spoof was not very helpful to the Australian people, in my opinion. If anything, it could have been an actor. Who knows?
Yeah, that's what I thought. How do we know that this is not just part of the ruse?
Yeah, how is, if you were to think about it that way, let's not only double think, let's triple think this, and think that the people in charge are give them a little bit more credit than that. They're not going to send some guy down here that my opinion is, lock the guy up, interrogate the hell out of him, waterboard the bastard, and send him back, and send his family back, because I wouldn't trust them. You don't know, and what happens? Okay, let's think about it this way. If we grab some Aussies that grandpa was a digger, They're connected to Anzacs. And we send an Aussie that was born and bred here to China. And the Chinese people say, oh, do you like communism? What do you think the Aussie's going to say? He's going to say, I like communism. Yes, it's good, because he doesn't want to get in trouble, right? Are you going to believe him? No. Do you love Xi Jinping? The Aussie's going to go, yeah, mate, I love Xi Jinping. He's good. China's good. And it's the same in reverse. People who have been brainwashed by communism and Xi Jinping, and they've been taught about the Opium Wars and the 100 Years of Humiliation. As soon as they arrive in Australia, we go, do you like democracy? And they go, yes, democracy good. Yes. And then we just go, okay, well, I'll take your word for it. I trust you now. What a load of crap that is. How dumb are we?
I could have had a Chinese spy on my show not too long ago, for all I know.
I don't know about that. Well, part of the subversion is creating weak-minded people like Paul Keating who actually believe it themselves. They're the most dangerous. They actually believe.
Bob Carr as well, who it was. I couldn't believe the interview he gave to Sky News. I think it might have been on the same day as the Keating address, where he was having to go at Andrew Hastie for comparing China with the Nazis when they helped us defeat the Nazis. Of course, the Chinese Communist Party wasn't in power during World War II. It was the nationalists Kuomintang who were the government at that time. So it was a nice bit of, I think, spin and alternate history there by Bob Carr.
Yeah, did Bob Carr explain to the Hong Kong people who are of Han Chinese descent why they call China Chi-Nazi? Because that's what the Hong Kong pro-democracy people are calling China right now.
Oh, you mean those violent demonstrators who are burning things, and well, the public are turning so much against them that the pro-Hong Kong democracy candidates won over 80% of the vote in local government elections, and the pro-China candidates got wiped out.
Yeah, they were lucky to get a voter turnout of 50 or 40% over the last decade, yet they had a voter turnout of over 70%, and 80% of that 70% voted against the CCP members. These people must be so easily manipulated by the CIA, right?
Yeah, or who, like it might be the Koch brothers, because they want to ransack China for all of its capital.
Yeah, I guess we know that there's also the Hong Kong, but we also know what's going on in Australia as well, and we do get a little bit confused with Hong Kong, Taiwan. The same game plan. It's we're playing on a different field here in Australia. They have to play under different rules, and so therefore they're playing it. They have to be far more under the radar here in Australia, and we know that it's happening. But we also need to be able to take action. Like recently, I investigated a milk tea franchise. And I'm hoping that some of my viewers are able to take some action on that. And I believe that this is an economic war. It's not just taking control of Australia's politics is really, it's about money and economics. There's a lot of people out there that say, okay, well, bankers' wars, every war's been a bankers' war, and then they don't piece together businesses in Australia trying to create monopolies and subvert us from within, steal Australian jobs, send them abroad, steal money from Australians, make it impossible for Australians to own a house, have a good job, push things that break up the family home and destroy us from within. This is all connected. And if you have a look at what's happening in Iran right now, they've just started rioting because America has successfully blockaded them and they've run out of oil, and so now they're fighting amongst themselves. This is part of the same game plan for China to try and blockade us, make us fight amongst ourselves. And if we're not vigilant, we could end up being the next Venezuela or Iran. And we don't really want that. And that's what shows like this are about, getting the message out. But don't just sit there, the people at home watching this, don't just sit there and click the like button and leave a pretty comment. You need to do something. You need to actually do something real out there. And that does require you to send an email, a phone call. I had a Hong Kong guy approach me in the street, and he said to me, he said, look, his family in Hong Kong is starting to get frustrated with all the rioting and everything. And he was like, oh, can you just come over here so we can talk? I don't want to be seen with you. And I was like, look, you need to speak up a little bit louder than that. And I looked around, I said, fuck China. I was like, you need to speak up. You need to yell. You need to let people know. Don't be so coward in this country, because the subversion will reach your doorstep soon enough. And that's the message for the Australian people. I've gone a bit of a rant. Sorry, Tim.
Blink and you might miss it. You mentioned milk and tea before. We might be drinking a lot of Chinese-owned milk. It's been announced today that one of Australia's largest dairy operations will be bought by China's biggest dairy chain, which makes some of Australia's most famous brands. It's called China Mengyu. So they're actually buying it from a Japanese company, but the Japs these days, well, we don't consider them, we haven't considered them a hostile actor for over 50 years. But this will include Lion milk, that its brand includes Dairy Farmers, which is of course is one of Australia's most iconic milk brands. Pure Milk, I've certainly bought a lot of that over the years. Dare and Farmers Union iced coffee. I remember Farmers Union was at 15 years ago, they made an extremely patriotic Australian ad, and well, that's out the window. Big M, of course, one of the most famous flavored milk, that's now going to be owned by China. Vitasoy, soy milk and coconut milk, so all the soy boys, they're going to be buying it from China. Daily Juice, that's a orange juice that I've bought, that's going to be owned by China. Juice Brothers Berry and Yoplait yogurt. So Yoplait, which of course is an Italian sounding, well, it's all going to be owned by China now for, it only costs 600 million. That's pretty cheap to get a whole bunch of our milk iconic brands and other juices.
When that happens, we need to make sure that every one of those companies continues to hire Australians. They don't just put a Chinese CEO in there, change all the labeling to Chinese, hire Chinese workers within Australia so that they can get their own colony within Australia and make them all rich, and then send money to each other. Because that's what's happening with a lot of these businesses. And that's why I did an investigation on this Chinese milk tea franchise called Hey Juice, is because they only hire Chinese people. They only buy products from China, and they expect Australian people to buy this product.
That sounds quite a racist hiring policy.
Well, that's exactly how it is. That's exactly how a colony behaves. There's real estate agents within Australia who will give a lease to a Chinese person 25% less per week than any other race. And if a Chinese person turns up to the inspection, they will racially choose the Chinese person and tell the other, say, Indian, black, or white people to go away and say, sorry, this one's already been taken. They won't even take an application and waste their time. This is how the colony is taking over Australia from within. They're subverting us from within. And then you've got Chinese people within the welfare office giving disability and NDIS to Chinese nationals that are fresh off the boat. They're just milking us from within.
Pardon the pun.
Yeah, they're milking. Yeah, well, this is serious. And I mentioned this to you before. I would like you guys at home to
hold
check
it
out.
up, nice and so all our audience can see it, or the ones who are watching on YouTube. Yes, Stealth and War.
Stealth War by Robert Spalding. This is the newest book. Robert Spalding is a brigadier general in the Air Force. He was he used to fly those stealth bombers. He's also got a PhD in economics, and he talks about it. Literally, I was reading the book and I was thinking I could have, everything that he says, it was like I was in an echo chamber. I don't even need to read this because we see eye to eye on everything. And I recommend you guys at home read this book. And it's very similar to this one here by Michael Pillsbury. I've mentioned this one before. This one was where Michael Pillsbury was really just trying to explain that China is the enemy. But Robert Spalding explains how the government and the agencies within America are now subverted by China. So they've got so many Sinophiles that it's hard to protect America's national security from within because there's so many traitors. There's no other way to explain them. Describe them. I mean, that America's flooded with traitors, he's saying, and that he had to leave the government, write a book, and just get involved in media because he fears for the future of America. And Australia is so much worse. We're flooded with so many traitors.
United States politics, they seem to be more concerned about Russian interference from Russian bots, Russian agents running for presidents. That's their obsession. They're hardly talking about, well, I guess holding another style McCarthy hearings in Congress for who are Sinophiles in the government, as you put it.
It's bipartisan now. It doesn't matter whether a Republican or Democrat gets into office. They are going to be anti-China from now on. This is the future. This is where we're going. There's decoupling. We are officially in a Cold War right now, and it's only going to escalate depending on how China behaves. Iran is one of those gold nuggets, and the Iranians are now burning the streets. They're rioting in the streets. They're burning down shops, and it only just started this week, and that is a direct result of UK and America blockading Iran and trying to cut off their oil supply. They're having trouble refining their own oil, and the general population is having trouble refueling their cars, and so they're becoming really angry right now, and that's part of the game plan. We are in a serious geopolitical Cold War right now, and it's been going on for a very long time, but the West has only just started to take some serious action. And it's amazing how many Australians, well, it's not really that amazing. If you're in Australia and you're not fully aware of the gravity of the situation, you won't be until it knocks on your front door. It's hard to see from here, and especially when the Australian media is only doing what they're told. The Australian media is full of idiots, and they have been forever, pretty much.
It seemed
Uh,
that because I was impressed by well, it wasn't just 60 Minutes because Nine Entertainment now owns the Fairfax newspapers, so they were in this age of where the mainstream corporate media is losing because of all of the online digital competitors. They were able to pull all the resources together to put to like they had a big expose in the Fairfax papers that morning, and then the 60 Minutes program. It was the full episode, and 60 Minutes. It's gone from doing sort of fluff pieces on celebrities and human interest stories to a full episode on talking to this spy and other examples of foreign interference. A couple of weeks back, it did one about the Jeffrey Epstein pedophile saga. But it's clear to you that you weren't as impressed as others were.
they're not exactly doing any real investigative journalism, are they?
Well,
All they're doing,
they went to they said they went to Hong Kong, and they went through documents and addresses and spoke to secret sources. It all sounded like because yeah, he basically went in between the reporter, Australia and Hong Kong. Like would have put. They've still got the budget these days to put together a 40-minute story over a number of months, of course, and you don't have that luxury.
yeah, they mentioned the forbidden bookstore. Where
Yes,
they went
the
and locked
book
them up.
kidnapping. Are you able to have you looked into that? Can you?
Yeah, of
Because
course,
obviously 60
that's not
Minutes.
anything new.
Yeah, 60 Minutes
That's not
obviously
anything new.
told a lot of people about that for the first time, but obviously you're the
Uh,
expert on this, so yeah, just
yeah, that wasn't anything new. That was big news a long time ago. They just disappeared, and no one knew where they went. And then a month later, a few of them appeared on state-run news in China, and they were apologizing for selling all of these forbidden books. Uh, a lot of these forbidden books you can't buy in Australia too, by the way, which is a little bit frustrating. Or I would have them all behind me just to annoy the pricks that watch my channel. I
they'll be
would love to
watching
get hold
now.
of some. So some of the books were there was it's more like tabloids. So just say with the monarchy, Princess Diana, and someone wrote a book about it, or someone in the king or queen's nephew's gay or something like that. It's like tabloid news. That was pretty much it. There was an actress called Bing Bing, and she was apparently having an affair with one of the CCP members that were high up. I would that I believe that they showed a lot of photos of these two hanging out, but it was banned within China. And then the tabloids in this Causeway Bay bookstore, they would put it together and create books and then sell them to the Hong Kong people. And there was a lot of Chinese people just crossing the border to try and get hold of these books and bring it back because it was gossip, and everybody likes gossip. And so, as the CCP is, they don't like this type of controversy getting out. They want them to be seen as gods, like Kim Jong Un is, and that's part of their arrogance and part of the reason why they're it's part of the problem here and the problem in Hong Kong as well. It's because they're not seen as real or human, and they want to be seen as above everybody else, and they like to learn from Britain, the British Empire, and how America became great, but they didn't learn that the British monarchy had to become more real. The Queen became a mechanic, and she was doing oil changes on cars. But the CCP, the government, they want to be seen as above the commoners, and that's part of their downfall. And it's happened throughout history in China as well.
Obviously, there's been a lot of scrutiny on the treatment of the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang province, and that's basically because, well, obviously they have concerns that they could be influenced by Islamic extremism, but it's more that they don't like the Chinese Communist Party, that these people have their own distinct cultural identity and religious practice, and so they've been called cultural genocide camps, re-education camps, are basically to erase their culture and make them love the Chinese Communist Party. And of course there was that amazing leak to the New York Times, the first bit of real journalism. Well, you wouldn't call it journalism, they just got documents like WikiLeaks and Julian Assange used to get from, it was obviously leaked by somebody in the Chinese Communist Party, which was quite unprecedented, and it has a lot of quotes from Xi Jinping where he says the party must unleash the tools of dictatorship, show absolutely no mercy in its eradication of extremists. And it goes down here that those infected by extremism would require a period of painful interventory treatment, lest they have their conscience destroyed, lose their humanity and murder without blinking an eye, which is, well, it pretty much seems like a monster, Xi Jinping. Like, that is pretty, like, he must not have any type of soul.
One thing I think is quite interesting is how the Jokowi Widodo, the Indonesian president, has been so conveniently quiet, considering he's the president of the largest Muslim population in the world, and they're right on our doorstep. You would think that he would be speaking up against China about this, but he has quite conveniently been quiet about it. And that tells me, and that should be a big warning to the Australian people, what's to come when it comes to Indonesia as well. And Jokowi Widodo, it's not really a tangent. I think these are connected. He's also bringing in some new laws to prevent people saying anything bad about the Indonesian government at all, or you can be locked up. They haven't been passed yet, but these are new laws that he's working on. And I think we need to be aware that it's not just an authoritarian regime within China, but it seems like there is like a disease. It's like this is catching on with some of our neighbors, and we don't want our neighbors to become authoritarian regimes, but it seems like some of them are becoming more authoritarian by having economic connections to China.
But the mainstream media tells us in ABC Q&A that it's Western nations that are becoming more fascist through extreme nationalist ideologies, like Marine Le Pen in France, and the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, in Germany, and Viktor Orban in Hungary, and obviously the nationalists in Poland. Apparently that's the real concern for the future of the Western world.
Well, if you look at Poland, Germany, you look at these countries, look at where they are on the map. The Germans haven't forgot about World War II. The Germans want to sell their BMWs and the Mercedes to, well, the largest market in the world. Where's that? 1.4 billion Chinese. So the Germans are starting to become, playing a little bit of, they're shaking hands with the Chinese. The Italians were fascists. Remember Mussolini?
Yes.
The Italians have signed up to the Belt and Road Initiative. That port is now controlled, not really controlled, but it is connected directly to China. And now they need another country. Germany works out perfectly. Poland is now, if you go look at Poland on the map, they're very close to Ukraine. They're very close to the entrance towards Russia. And part of the reason why a lot of this infiltration of Europe is possible is because their economies aren't doing too well, so therefore China can easily buy their way in, and money equals power. You look at Paris. Paris is burning. Just look at all these places on the map. Look at what's happening in them, and try to figure out who they're becoming friends with. The British aren't really doing too much to fight back. They don't really have the economy to win friends in Europe at the moment. If anything, they've gone internal, and they're playing a little bit more mercantilist. So they don't have that influence, and that's kind of what's happening. You look at Britain, you look at France, you look at Japan. These are the countries that were involved in the Opium Wars. China knows about that, and so they're becoming good friends with their enemies. South Korea, Germany, Italy. This is not an accident. It's all, look at it on the map and look at how China's playing the world off against each other. You can see what I'm getting, right?
Yeah, in Australia, this discussion about our relationship with China going forward, it was really kickstarted and put into the national spotlight by Liberal backbencher Andrew Hastie with his op-ed in the Fairfax papers back in, I think it was around about late August. And basically since then, this has become a political wedge issue because, well, Labor Party, they have always been a bit more friendly to China, and well, it was their former Senator Sam Dastyari. His relationship with, well, now banned from Australia, Chinese businessman Huang Zhengmo was revealed, and he was parodying Chinese talking points on the South China Sea. But we learnt that, well, Dastyari wasn't just some naive, foolish, brash young whippersnapper who got just caught up in raising money. There, before New South Wales Independent Commission Against Corruption, that they laundered the New South Wales Labor Party from this Huang Zhengmo $100,000 worth of donations in an Audi bag, which they attributed to just local Chinese workers, these people who were donating $5,000 when it was clearly, when the Electoral Commission went through an audit, that they couldn't have donated this money. That, of course, led to the downfall of the New South Wales Labor Secretary, Kayla Murnane, and that exposed just how deep the New South Wales Labor was reliant on these Chinese donations. Then, of course, there was Gladys Liu, the new Liberal MP for Chisholm, which is where allegedly the Chinese Communist Party wanted to fund a Manchurian candidate or a Mandarin candidate with this luxury car dealer, Bo Nick Zaho, who he joined the Liberal Party in 2015, was in the electorate area of Chisholm. He was approached by, allegedly, another local Chinese businessman, Brian Shen, and Zaho was found dead in a motel room in Mount Waverley in March this year. The cause of death is unknown, but it's suspected that he was assassinated by the Chinese. But obviously Gladys Liu, her community, Chinese community links, which they all go back to China's United Front, and obviously her interview with Andrew Bolt, where she said she couldn't recall all of these, and then there was a lot of questions about her fundraising, where the Victorian Liberal Party had to give some money back because they weren't. They weren't 100% sure that this money didn't come from Chinese Communist Party agents, and Malcolm Turnbull was discouraged from attending a fundraiser with her when she was just a normal party member because ASIO had concerns about the guest list. So a lot of people still think, well, they got their Mandarin candidate in Gladys Liu, but for now it's just these associations that she needs to clean up. Though it didn't help her that she was at Box Hill when the local police station was raising the Chinese Communist flag on the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. She was blowing out the candles on a Chinese Communist flag cake in the area. And obviously Labour attacked the Liberals for that. And even though a few months ago they were attacking Andrew Hastie for basically doing this irresponsible op-ed, putting our diplomatic relations at risk, but Andrew Hastie was hyped up in the media last month that he was going to go on a study tour to China to confront the Chinese Communist Party and tell them to their face what he thought of them. Andrew Hastie being a former SAS officer, obviously that sort of made a good sort of media spectacle, and James Paterson, Liberal Senator, was going with him. I initially feared that maybe they'd go missing in China, or they were going to be held hostage, but China Matters, the study tour organizer, said that their visas were denied, and they'd be allowed to visit as long as they repented for what they'd said. And they threw in a whole thing that China's been colonized before, and get this neo-colonialism out of your head. But it had the effect of uniting Penny Wong. She condemned China for denying the visas to elected Australian politicians, and even Richard Dean Harley, the Greens leader. And so this, I guess this, I would say, political football about our future relationship with China. I mean, Bob Carr and Paul Keating, yes, they form a Premier and Prime Minister respectively, but they're not there anymore. There seemed to be, I think, a less political point scoring, and you sort of saw a bit of a more bipartisanship that, yes, we need to seriously rethink how we're going to deal with this nation now.
Whenever the Australian politicians go over to China, their phones will be hacked and their laptops will be hacked. I'll tell you a little bit of my own personal story. I was in Guangzhou, and I was out not for a very long time. My laptop was inside a safe. And when I came back, I turned my laptop on and it was entirely wiped. Now, someone had got into my hotel, into my safe, and wiped every piece of information off my laptop. They're probably running out of time because I wasn't out very long. And this type of intelligence gathering can happen through Wi-Fi networks in hotels. If you drop your phone anywhere and it's out of sight for a few minutes, they have a way of infiltrating it. So I hope they are aware of that. I'm sure they would be. The other factor is what happens is when you're part of a think tank and you're discussing China, what they often say is, okay, well, you've been denied a visa to China. You haven't been to China in 5 years. What do you know about China? You're no longer a China expert, and that's part of China's plan. That's part of China's plan. They actually deny visas to academics in America and Australia every day. And the reason is because it discredits you. You don't know what you're talking about anymore.
Well, that's their intention, but you really think that a study tour, you're going to get the full story? I mean, seriously.
Well, that argument is played out amongst academics in Western universities.
Well, that is if that goes on, that is ridiculous.
It's a real thing, and so that's how China turns Western academics. They go over there. They're like puppy dogs. They get some young guy in his 20s that he's a postdoc. He's just arrived, and the billionaires take him out and drive him around in a Bentley, and they send a lot of pretty girls his way. It's like a puppy dog. Give him lots of treats, teach him how to sit. He comes back loving China, and they're the most dangerous. They're like, because they love China independently. They haven't been told to love China. They're in fact the most dangerous. And the people who are supposedly anti-China aren't allowed in the country. And so the pro-China people, they come back and say, look, you haven't been there. It's changed. Things have changed now. You've never been there in the last 5 years or 10 years. What would you know about China? I was there last week. And that's how China manipulates the narrative within Western countries. And the next level is, if we can't get rid of, Gladys Liu hanging up, celebrating the CCP at a police station in Australia. She can say she's pro-democracy and loves Australia all she wants. She's a CCP prick. She's a spy. She's pushing their narrative within my country. And if we can't get rid of her, imagine how it'll be impossible to get rid of an Australian-born Chinese who has been offered one of these $50 degrees in Tsinghua University, goes over there for, pays for their flights over there, free accommodation, 50 Australian dollars, comes back with a university degree, brainwashed, and tries to get into Australian politics, which is the future of Australia. It'll be impossible to get rid of one of those.
Well, Section 44 of the Australian Constitution, which talks about dual allegiance, I don't think it's ever been tested whether you basically have to, because it's easier with dual citizenship. You've got two citizenships, but would you have to, under Section 44, basically have to convict like an elected politician of treason or espionage to get them disqualified?
It makes this whole situation that we're in very difficult. And I think we need to focus on, and this is why I focus on the discriminatory hiring practices, because this country, their economy is 18, 20 times larger than Australia's. Think about that for a second. It is a huge economy, and they are buying out, as you mentioned, the milk companies, but they're buying out everything else. And if they are allowed to get away at the bottom level, the milk tea franchises, they're allowed to get away with these discriminatory trade practices, hiring practices, sorry. That will go all the way to the big monopolies in the future. And that's something that will impoverish everyday Australians. And they're not and it's one of the big factors I believe that we need to be focusing on, is because it just feels like it's almost impossible to stop, and we do a lot of talking, but we're not taking a lot of action. And that's why I made that video exposing Hey Juice and asking my viewers to call the Fair Work Ombudsman and the ATO and try to get some media coverage for this, is because if we can't do this with a small little milk tea franchise, how difficult will it be later on? And by the way, China, we see China as this country full of kind of economic slaves, cheap labor, etc. But China is now looking for cheap labor in other countries. I know it blows your mind that one of the cheapest places full of factories is now branching out and trying to create economic slaves in other countries. The Chinese aren't really that hardworking at all. It's just that the majority have to work hard to feed themselves, and the people at the top are slave drivers. That's pretty much it. but they're moving into poorer third world countries, and that's part of the Belt and Road Initiative. They're trying to create economic slaves through third world countries. And if Australia doesn't be vigilant right now, we will be their economic slaves. And that's the future. That's the future plan for Australia, is to create big factories and have us toiling in the dirt, sending all the resources back to China for free, and putting together their little trinkets and creating factories down here. And that would just make them, it would make them so happy that they've got the revenge for the opium wars and the 100 years of humiliation, and that's what they want.
It seems that, yeah, they've got a very long memory of history, the Chinese Communist Party leadership, and it's almost what you've just described there as some sort of sadistic historical revenge. Who's colonizing who now? Who's exploiting who now? How the tables have turned. Mwahaha.
It seems that way, but the world is far more malevolent than you could ever imagine. There's a lot of bad stuff that happens out there that the media and their pretty little pictures, they don't tell you the mean things that happen out there. Iran is now burning and the people are killing each other, and there's like a little civil war going on. Do you think people are covering that? Does any of your viewers in the comments, have they heard of that?
They probably mention it for maybe a couple of minutes on Sky News during their news bulletin. Yeah. That's probably about it. There's not going to be a dedicated segment of, say, maybe on Credlin and Paul Murray Live.
Don't get me wrong. It's a mean world, and this is our doing. This is the Western countries, and don't get me wrong. I really don't care, because they're our enemy. That's how the world is. This is a zero-sum Cold War that we are in right now. And you think that turning the average Australian and taking them out of the finance industry and teaching them how to wash dishes or dig holes isn't something that the CCPP wants to do? They don't want you to be educated. They don't want you to have a good job. This is the future. This is where it is all happening, and it's happening under the noses of the Australian people. When I was at the front of the Apple store, I was abused by sinophiles in the media. What I was trying to say was, buy an Apple phone. Don't buy a Samsung or one of these Huawei, Oppo, Vivo, or Xiaomi phones. Every cent is being sent to this evil dictatorship that is now building bases off the coast of Australia with the same plan of blockading us the same way we blockaded Iran just then. That's the future. Do you think they would care? I don't really care what happens in Iran. No offense to the Iranians out there. But do you think they care if that happens to us?
Well, that's why obviously it's reported in our media as a negative thing, the return of nationalism in Western nations, but a lot of the Western nations and the superpowers, the neocons who've been in charge in the United States have seen themselves as globalist Wilsonians spreading peace and democracy in the world, and that's why you're seeing, I'm not sure if you've been following the Groyper War, but that is basically, we need to put America first, no dual allegiance and loyalties, and like you just said with the Iranian people, and no offense to them, but you're Australia first. You want to save your country.
Well, we are part of a team, and that's Team Blue. Iran is part of Team Red. They're our enemy. They want to buy and sell oil and send it to China and Russia. They want to feed this massive behemoth on our doorstep. They are officially our enemy. But the nationalism discussion, how's this for a way to look at it? Every immigrant that comes from, arguably third world countries, when they arrive in Australia, are they really loyal to Australia, or are they just here for the cash?
Well, that's what it seems to be a lot of these days, that we're just seeing economic migration. We're definitely not seeing
Exactly.
integration or assimilation. And I talked about this on my last show with Blair Cottrell, that you can just set up a set-top box with Mandarin or Hindi stations and live like you were in your homeland, just that you've got all the economic benefits of being in another country. You're basically living as a citizen abroad.
Laissez-faire and democracy and all those goodies, land rights. These are things that we created in the West. These are things that made the West great. And then we have people that come from third world shitholes, and they're third world shitholes for a very good reason, because they're mercantilist. They don't respect land rights. They don't respect freedom, laissez-faire. They don't allow them to. There's too many extractive economies where they just extract from people that become wealthy. That's really partly China as well. This is when people come from that type of environment, they bring that mentality with them. And the problem is that when there's too many of them, they have that communist extractive economy mindset, and they bring it with them. If there's a little drip approach to immigration, they learn what is right and what is wrong. They learn that our way has been superior, and it is the best way for a very good reason. They come here for a better life, but when we have so many, come for a walk down George Street with me one day. This place is a third world shithole. I'm the minority. I walk around and no one speaks English, and the majority of them. How's this for a conversation? I've been fuming over this conversation all week. I had a conversation with an Indian lady, and she said, "Oh, Lee, that's where's that name from?" I was like, "Look, my uncle fought in Vietnam, and I'm I don't know how many generations deep in Australia. My great grandfather was he was one of those guys that climbed the Sydney Harbour Bridge and had the gloves and was heating up the rivets and bang them in there. And you know what she said to me? She goes, "Not with a name like that, you didn't." Just dismissed me and has no respect for this country or me. And this is what happens when you have too many people come in and they're just here for the cash. If Australia goes under tomorrow, that mongrel will just get on the next flight back to India.
Well, politicians in Australia are certainly not concerned about that. Peter Dutton brags we got the annual migration intake reduced from 190,000 to 160,000 this year, or we don't want to have a discriminatory immigration policy that's un-Australian and illiberal, and of course big business. I don't think people say they want cheap labor. I don't think that that's actually true. They want flexible labor. Like, for example, like if you just go to a lot of doctors' clinics, half the staff are Indian. Obviously, doctors get paid a lot, but they want the employers the flexibility. And there's talked about, oh, we need skilled migrants because there's skill shortages and that, like we couldn't. And nothing against these doctors. They've obviously studied medicine and they're very competent. They've got expertise. But 50 years ago, I'm sure we had great Australian European doctors? Why did we need to import them? That's sort of not what 457 visas, that sort of thing was about.
We have not been looking after the Australian population. The government has sold out the people, and that's pretty much it. In China, if I go to China, what jobs can I do? I can, one, teach English. The second job I can do, teach English. The only other job I can do is start up my own startup and bring money into China. It's the only way I can get a job over there. But they protect their own people, and in the cities they have Chinese-only hotels, Chinese-only apartments that are cheaper. The thing is, they do the same thing in Australia. Now, the people who are losing out economically are the Australian people. Now, this brings me to the most important part here. Is I've been speaking to a lot of Aussies, of course. My channel gets a lot of views. I get a lot of emails, and it's got to the stage where who cares about Australia anymore? Now, this is a big point I would like to make here. We're getting to, this is very serious, actually. It's not a joking topic that I'm talking to you about now, Tim. This is very serious. One of the most controversial things I think I've ever said is that what happens when people like you and me, we realize that we can't do anything anymore? What happens when we already have a lot of skepticism about our politicians and our media? But what happens when we realize it's too late? Do you know what I'm trying to say here? Like I even walk around George Street sometimes and I got some rubbish in my hand, and I think, I used to be a surfer. I hate people that litter, but now I think it's not really my country anymore. I'll throw it on the ground. Someone else can pick it up. It's not my country anymore. This is not my country. So I don't care anymore. You know what I'm trying to say here? And how many Australians are starting to feel that nihilism creep in, where you start to think, this is not my country. Let them clean it up, because it's their country now.
Well, you're seeing that in the state of California, which has got homeless tents everywhere. There's, in San Francisco, people literally shitting in the street, the most unhygienic thing you can think of. And California is just one of 50 states in the United States, but it's the biggest one. And of course, it's seen the biggest demographic change and replacement. And this is what the America First advocates have been talking about. It used to be a red state. Now it's basically a one-party blue state.
Well, we don't really want Australia to get to that point. And I don't think that the politicians realize what something simple like me walking down George Street thinking, should I throw this wrapper in the bin? Do I care about Australia enough to do that anymore?
Like, when was the last person fined for littering? That's the other thing I was thinking of. Does that even happen anymore? Like, if you just throw your trash on the ground in the street, like, police ever...
It's not really... This is not really a rubbish or trash or environment. This is not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something bigger. I'm talking about the point where we realize that it's not our country anymore and that we don't care anymore. That's when revolution happens, and that's when everybody suffers. I'm not here talking about these topics lightly. There's a lot of nihilism amongst the real Australian people, and when you start mentioning immigrants coming here and taking jobs and just being here for the money, what happens when the money runs out? What happens when Medicare? We can't fund Medicare anymore.
Well, you know what happens then? It becomes tribal warfare.
and that's something that not only me, but I dare say millions of Australians are starting to feel today. And that is where the government needs to start taking action right now, because we don't want to turn into Paris. We don't want to turn into Hong Kong. And people might think that my little chats with you are some lighthearted little tabloid bullshit, but it's not. This is real. This is our lives we're talking about, Tim. And the people at home, I hope they're aware of the gravity. I don't sit here and read these books for nothing. This is not, I don't read all these.
So you can sit around and feel smart, which some people read books for.
I could, there's so many other things I could be doing with my time, but I see an end play happening here. And that end, it doesn't matter if you got a PhD. It doesn't matter what business you're running. If people are burning the streets down out the front of your door, that's the future I see for Australia, is what's happening in Iran and Venezuela right now. I would much rather be focusing on, making money and working on my own PhD.
Yeah, why picket fences, raising your family in suburbia?
Exactly. But it's at the point now where the average Aussie doesn't see this as their own country anymore. And we're the only ones keeping it together because no one else gives a shit. And that's when it gets serious. And that's part of the reason why I talk about these topics.
Well, let's bring it back to the mainstream view, and that the reason why we should be so threatened by China is because it's not a democracy. It's it's still called a communist state, but it's basically a fascist state, which doesn't have democracy, is led by a dictator for life, and is putting its own citizens in what are concentration camps. And there's all of these Facebook filters, solidarity with the Hong Kong protesters, and if we can just get at least preserve democracy in Hong Kong, then there's hope to free the rest of the Chinese people. And of course, then there's the sort of speculation, what is China going to do as these protests get more and more assertive, and there's more violence, because everyone's thinking, will there be a Tiananmen Square 2.0? There is some people who believe that maybe China will just cut their losses and let Hong Kong be a democracy because they don't need it like they did 22 years ago when they took charge of it from the British.
No, Hong Kong is run by China, and they can ruin as many lives as they want. It's going to remain under their control. The problem is when we start thinking, oh, okay, well, we can let the refugees in from Hong Kong, and they come over here, and then we have more troubles here. We run out of road. We're at the end of the road. We're the cul-de-sac. Australia's the cul-de-sac at the end of this Chinese road. And once it all ends up here, it's not going to look very pretty, is it? We don't have Australians that are willing to kick out politicians like Gladys Liu or do anything about cheating Chinese businesses like Hey Juice. What happens when something serious happens? What happens when Medicare cannot be funded? Grandma dies from an illness because she can't get to the hospital. How many immigrant parasites are sitting on the old age pension right now? Our economy is in a deficit right now. All it will take is one good little shock from the Chinese Navy to try and disrupt our trade routes, and it will cause so much trouble to this country. It doesn't matter how smart you are or hardworking you are. You can't get out of that. There's a lot of people with PhDs now that are avoiding the Molotov cocktails in Iran today, right now. They're trying to figure out what they're going to do with their children. The electricity's off. This is geopolitics. And Iran's full of Iranians. They can band together, but Australia's not really full of Australians. I very rarely see, and I saw a guy with an Aussie jersey on today. I said, "Whoa, it's good to see an Aussie jersey. I haven't seen one of those in years." And he laughed, um, because there's not too many people left in Sydney that are loyal to Australia. It's kind of sad.
Well, I was quite horrified. This was way back in 2012 when I attended the Australian soccer team playing a World Cup qualifier against Saudi Arabia. And I would say at least a third of the stadium were Saudi Arabia supporters. They were really loud and boisterous, and I was sort of like, where have you all come from? And of course, Saudi Arabia is, it gives China a run for its money with its human rights abuses, and like they're all dressed in quite Western attire. The Saudi Arabians in the crowd, and it sort of hit me that how dare you come here from a Sharia law dictatorship and come into, well, because it's obvious it's not just some away supporters. There was a huge contingent there, and they were gladly cheering on their team. I would say I would say it was quite in your face. And this was 2012, and I just wondered who was sending them there. How were these all Saudi Arabian students in Australia? And yeah, I just couldn't believe it.
So if you're an 18-year-old Aussie and you've been taught, you've been taught about the fair go and egalitarianism, and on your first job, you turn up and there's a few immigrants from some shithole and they're mistreating you because of the color of your skin. Then you go to university, which is subverted by the Chinese, and you have feminist bullying white men in the universities. You're going to grow up to be a bitter, angry, possible future terrorist of Australia. And that's part of my overarching vision of Australia, which I'd like to prevent. But we can't prevent it unless the people that come here understand that egalitarianism doesn't mean that you come here, you get all the free goodies, and you take. It means you need to give a little as well. And because we've had such a flood, this is an economic problem. This is not just a cultural problem. It's the reason why.
And not just a liberal democracy problem.
No, I don't think so. I think this is. I think if you're rich, I don't. It doesn't matter what religion you are or what political affiliation. If you have a job, you can have a family, you can own your own house, and you can get by with almost anything as long as you have enough money. And money is very important. It's very important, and that's part of the reason why Australia has avoided this type of civil strife. But we are heading towards economic strife, and we have 250 years now almost of little to no economic strife. Our country has not become, we don't have the ability to deal with it. Whereas most of the countries around us, if they were to be hit with some sort of economic strife, they'd be able to deal with it to some extent. But imagine the average Aussie turning up, doing the 9-to-5 job, has a nice house. Next thing you know, overnight, cannot afford to feed his kids. All the stresses with all that, people snap, and there's a lot of that slowly creeping into Australia, and I'm dearly concerned with how we're going to deal with it.
Yes, and we'll finish on this. Our politicians, they literally don't know what to do about this. This is why they're at Parliament this week, and I don't think they have a plan. They're just used to just going through the motions every 3 years, and they're sort of thinking, oh shit, the country's on the line. And politicians, at the end of the day, uh, they are answerable to the people, and if the people make them afraid enough, then it'll jolt them into action. But of course, then you have these seats such as Chisholm in Melbourne, which you could vote for Gladys Liu with all of her CCP community links, or you could vote for Jennifer Yang with all of her CCP links. And then, of course, there's Reid in New South Wales, another swing multicultural seat. There's also above Sydney Harbour there is Bennelong as well, which is quite it's a diverse electorate of different Asian ethnicities. But I remember Reid, Craig Laundy was the local member. He said that we couldn't have free speech in Australia because his constituents didn't like it. And so our politicians, they're going to have to do a lot of thinking and make tough decisions. And yeah, you're basically like, probably this is probably a hyperbolic example, but you're like John F. Kennedy now in the Cuban Missile Crisis. How do you avert the world on the brink, or Australia on the brink? Because because it is a Cold War, but I would say in this situation, you're keeping everything in a bottle for the moment, but eventually there's going to be this pressure where the bottle just pops.
Yeah, like if I see a young Aussie, some like young Aussie teenage boys walking around, I'm like, I ask them, how you going? You know, what are your plans for the future? What are you going to do? I've never really met, I haven't really met too many that have concrete plans for the future. I speak to them. I met one guy recently. He was 18, and he was saying how, you know, he's planning on going to university. You know, he's got some big plans. But the majority of the time, I'll see these kids with the funny hats on and the little shorts and the bum bags, and they look like they're drug dealers or something. And I ask them about their family and things like that, and it's the future's looking kind of bleak if this is the next generation of Australians, because if they're not going to university and getting a good job, and they're not focusing on having a family and having some sort of a civil future, you know, some sort of respectable future, that's not exactly the type of retirement I want to live in. I don't want to be 70 years old and be bashed for my wallet on the walk down to the shops, and that's where we're heading. That's unfortunately where we are heading.
Well, we'll see how the Australian Zoomers, as they are known, how they react to, well, what is coming, because I don't think that there's sand deep enough that you can bury your head in. But I've enjoyed your analysis again, Dave. I'll have you on again when inevitably the next China revelation is reported in the mainstream media.
We'll talk tomorrow then, because there's going to be a lot more.
Okay.
Every day there'll be something.
Well, this is going to air tomorrow, so who knows, it could become old news by the time people are seeing this. But for my own broadcasting purposes, I hope they wait a day.
Yeah, it's a little bit depressing how we ended it, but that's the reality of the situation. We have some serious problems in Australia, economic problems, and that on the ground level is jobs and education, Medicare. We need to look after people. We can't allow the naive 1% to get rich and destroy the middle class, because we're going to have rioting in the streets. I don't fear Muslim terrorists. I fear 18-year-old Aussies that have had enough and just want to burn this place to the ground and I don't blame them when they come from broken families and they're not getting an education that they deserve,
All
and they're
right.
being
I think. Well, yeah. I think you're leaving. I think that's your intention, leaving things on quite a apocalyptic note. But I think I'll end your your ranting
We
for
can go for
tonight.
half an hour if you want. I'll rant for another hour.
No, we've got Dia Beltran waiting for her weekly live stream, so we'll call it for tonight. But yes,
Okay,
lots more
fair enough.
to talk about in tomorrow, next week's news.
Okay, thanks for having me on, Tim.
This is WilmsFront, brought to you by the Unshackled.net.
And we're back live now. I noticed that people in the comments corrected me. I couldn't, obviously, because this was a pre-record. I couldn't correct myself right at the time. But I said that Yople was Italian when it's actually a French word. One of my good friends, he's a French and Italian teacher. So if he knew that I made that mistake, there'd be hell to pay. Now, as I mentioned, federal parliament is back this week. I haven't got much time left, but I'll comment briefly on what was the biggest story today. And well, it occurred yesterday that the New South Wales Police said they were investigating the Energy Minister Angus Taylor because last month it was revealed that he'd supplied the Daily Telegraph with, or his office had doctored City of Sydney travel expense reports, which said that the City of Sydney had spent millions in travel when it was only thousands, and he doesn't know how that how he got a hold of that doctored report. He said that he downloaded it from the City of Sydney website, but the City of Sydney said the metadata proves it had never been changed. But Scott Morrison today, it's revealed he spoke to the New South Wales Police Commissioner about this matter, which is not a good look because now he's being accused, Scott Morrison, of interfering in an ongoing investigation. And so that's been dominated the latter half of federal parliament this day. That is all for this show tonight. Thank you everyone for watching. I'm glad that everyone enjoyed the show, and certainly this won't be the last time we talk about China's influence in Australia. But as I said, Dia Beltran is up next. She's got Orthodox rabbi as a guest, which will certainly be interesting. Of course, I'll be back tomorrow night on the Uncackables, which is 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time on its dedicated show channel. Of course, we've become known as the Australian Groper Update Show. But there is certainly a lot of other things happening this week, especially some important media news that has happened over the past 24 hours. Some good and some bad, but I'll save that tomorrow night. And of course, my colleague Steel Archer, his Detonation program is live most weekday mornings on its dedicated channel. And you can go to steelarcher.com to see the archive of episodes. There's a new report from Tiger Mountain with Richard Wollstonecroft. That's on the Unshackled main channel. And there's a new one coming out later this week. Last night was Trans Tasman Talk with my New Zealand counterpart, Right Minds at Douay de Boer. That's at 7 p.m. every Tuesday, live on the Unshackled's YouTube channel. That's Melbourne time. Of course, you can see last night's live replay. We talked about a lot of the China revelations, and for those who don't tune into that show, Douay makes a consistent point that the Chinese have basically taken over New Zealand and got their own Mandarin candidates in both the National and Labour Party, which that should be a much more of a story in Australia, given New Zealand is part of the Five Eyes intelligence network, and China has successfully stabbed one of the Five Eyes, made them blind. Of course, XYZ's content, their live show is on Mondays at 9 p.m. Melbourne time on the Matty Rose live YouTube channel. And of course, Matty has his own vlog channel, Matty's Modern Life, and of course Dave Hiscock hosts the Melbourne Traditionalists podcast with Mark Moncrief, which is on its own YouTube channel. And of course James Fox Higgins, The Rational Rise, he is still posting occasional content on his YouTube channel, and of course the administrator of rationalrise.tv, which is a free speech self-hosted video platform. So if YouTube ever pulls the plug, which they're changing their terms and conditions that they can basically do that at their discretion, you can see all of Unshackled Productions, XYZ Productions, and of course Rational Rise Productions, D. Beltran, Dusty Bogan Productions, all on rationalrise.tv, where you can also support our work. At the moment, you can, supporting my show and also Unshackled Productions, you can go to the unshackled.net/membership or the unshackled.net/donate, as well as sending through Super Chat through Entropy throughout the various shows that we have. And of course, we're on PayPal, Patreon. Just broke today that Onision, who is a popular a cultural YouTuber, has a lot of young teenager fans, which he's been accused of taking advantage of. He had his Patreon deleted for doxing one of his one of the girls who accused him of misconduct. So that was trending on Twitter today. He's certainly not the first to be deleted from Patreon, but I think we can all agree that that was a legitimate reason for him to be banned from Patreon. And of course, we have our online store at the unshackled.net/store. Of course, if you want to keep in touch with me, you can see on my social media links at the show website at timwilms.com. I'm on facebook.com/WilmsFront, twitter.com/WilmsFront, gab.com/WilmsFront, and also gab.com/timwilms and minds.com/timwilms. I try to reserve the Tim Wilms profile link on as many social media as possible, because I like to be the only known Tim Wilms. And I should have mentioned we are on Subscribestar, and of course timwilms.com has the link to the podcast version of the show, which you can listen to in addition to watching the live replay. I'm on Apple, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, and Spotify. There's our email list at theunshackledbattlefield.net that you get a free ebook if you sign up to our list. And of course, we're still publishing regular content on theunshackled.net. So thank you everyone so much for your company tonight. WilmsFront will be back Friday night, 7 p.m. Melbourne time, on the Tim Wilms YouTube channel. Of course, make sure you give this episode and all of the ones before a thumbs up, comment below. Make sure you're not just subscribed, but click the bell to allow notifications, and please share this, because YouTube won't recommend this often. I'll see you all tomorrow night on the Uncackables, but until then, enjoy your night, and please enjoy Dear Beltran's stream.
Thanks for tuning in to WilmsFront. Visit timwilms.com or Rational Rise TV to view the archive of episodes. And keep visiting theunshackled.net to view all our shows, and to keep up with the latest real news and analysis.